Golf is known as a gentleman's sport, but what about when it's not? Arrests, drugs, insider trading, and strange addictions. These are 11 of the biggest scandals in golf history. We may as well start off a video about golf controversies with golf's most controversial figure ever, John Daly. A drinking, smoking, overweight golfer who on his day could beat out the likes of Tiger Woods. But it wasn't Tiger that he was fighting against in this story. After hitting balls into a group ahead of them, reportedly on numerous occasions, 62-year-old Bob Roth would confront the two-time major winner. The two began pushing and shoving until it was eventually taken to the ground, where the two would wrestle, until eventually being separated. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want John on top of me. Both men declined to press charges, but John was given a £20,000 fine and banned for the remainder of the 1994 PGA Tour season. And that definitely won't be the last time John features in this video, but another golfer who falls into the same category of players that you either love or you hate, Phil Mickelson. His ability is undoubted, spending 26 years in the sport's top 50 players, a truly remarkable golfer, and the oldest major winner of all time. But his lack of filter on sensitive topics and his notorious gambling problems make him one of the sport's most polarizing figures. But in this story, he might have tried to push his luck one step too far. In 2010, Mickelson asked a stockbroker to transfer several $1 million into an offshore account to pay off gambling debts, which prompted the IRS to investigate him for money laundering. But that couldn't have come at a worse time, because he was also involved in an insider trading investigation surrounding a philanthropist and businessman, Billy Walters. Walters, eventually sentenced to 5 years in prison, was being accused of giving Phil inside information that made the golfer over $900,000. He tried to convince Phil to testify in court and state that he hadn't been given any information. Phil originally agreed to it, but as Walters wrote in his biography, he never ended up coming through. In the middle of both investigations, Walters claimed that Phil hired a very well-connected attorney who somehow struck a deal with the SEC to completely clear his name in both investigations. He also wrote that his attorney performed a legal trick so improbable that it was like Harry Houdini pulling a rabbit out of a hat while in chains underwater. Phil just had to return the profit that he'd made on the dodgy trade back to the SEC, and in doing so, successfully dodged both investigations. Phil and Walters were supposedly friends, but on this occasion, Phil threw his friend under the bus and then drove it over him himself. But there was one standout case where a golfer was arrested, and no, it's not Tiger Woods, but instead, current world number one, Scottie Scheffler. A recent story that left the golf world shocked, to say the least. After a tragic event had caused a vendor at the event to lose their life, police surrounded the perimeter of the golf course. Scottie, who just wanted to get to his tee time, tried to maneuver his way through the bollards and police cars as quickly as possible when an officer told him to stop. He continued driving as he didn't realize the officer was in fact an officer, being completely unaware of why the police were there in the first place. The officer grabbed onto the car door handle and the side of Scottie's SUV in an attempt to get him to stop, which allegedly dragged him on his knees for several meters. As a result, Scottie was arrested and initially charged with second-degree assault, reckless driving, disregarding traffic signals, and third-degree criminal mischief. The charges have since been dropped, which is unsurprising, given the police body cam footage that's been released since the event. All of the officers seemingly had no idea who Scottie was. Not once did Scottie ever say, "Do you know who I am?" or imply that he was above the law. He was taken to a jail cell, which he was reportedly warming up in, still hoping to make it to the event later that day. He was released, and due to the events of the day, his tee time was delayed, and he was able to make it in time for a quick warm-up and play his round, somehow still finishing the event 13 under after being incredibly shaken up. Scottie is known as being a humble and polite guy, but the same can't be said for this next story, LIV golfer Dustin Johnson. A hell of a golfer on his day, and world number one for a period in 2018, but he's not the wisest, being described multiple times as having a bag of cement for a brain, and Rick Riley's famous remark that Dustin is so dense that light bends around him. You think at world number one, and with more money than you knew what to do with, you might be slightly smarter than to throw it all away. Well, that would be the case if you didn't have cement for a brain. Johnson was suspended on 2 occasions. He failed a drug test in 2009 for marijuana and was let off with a stern word and a slap on the wrist. In 2012, he was caught with cocaine in his system, but the PGA Tour kept that one under wraps and never made it public, simply stating that he had to miss the remainder of the season due to personal choices. In 2014, he was caught again, with more cocaine in his system, and at this point he was given a 6-month publicised suspension from the PGA. He has since gone to LIV Golf, but if he gets up to any naughty drug business over in Saudi Arabia, he'll be seeing 6 months in jail rather than a suspension from golf. But what happens when a golfing controversy is so big that it gets taken to court? This golfer was accused of ruining her legacy for a better lie. This is the story of Jane Blalock versus the PGA. After reaching the status of the top money winner on the LPGA Tour, she competed in the Bluegrass Invitational in May 1972. After the second round, the board called her in to tell her that she was disqualified from the tournament, alleging that she had incorrectly signed her scorecard. The tournament director stated that Blalock did not mark her ball properly on the 17th green, and then failed to take a 2-stroke penalty. All 5 members of the executive committee were themselves active players, causing a conspiracy against the best female player at the time. 27 players on the tour also signed a petition stating that a more severe action should be taken against Jane, more than the fine, the probation, and the disqualification that she had already been hit with. Jane filed an antitrust lawsuit against the LPGA, and in June 1972, a federal judge ruled that LPGA players cannot police their own members, and that Blalock's suspension was ill-founded. There was a mixed response amongst the golf community, with her former instructor saying she has a compulsion to win. I think she needs psychiatric help. Other players like Sandra Palmer came out and stated that they had never seen her cheat, and that only 1 or 2 of the players who had reported her had ever played with her. She would eventually be cleared of any wrongdoing and paid over $18,000 in damages, a huge sum at the time. The court also ordered the LPGA to pay her legal fees of $95,000. To this day, we will never know if she wanted that better lie. But one controversy that never made it to the court, but maybe should have, and it came on the infamous weekend when Tiger Woods won his first ever major. PGA veteran Fuzzy Zoeller made some pretty shocking comments when asked about what Tiger might serve for the winner's dinner, a tradition in golf where the previous Masters winners host a dinner for the other players who have won the event.
He's doing quite well, pretty impressive. Little boy's driving it well, he's putting well, he's doing everything it takes to win. So you know what you guys do when he gets in here? Pat him on the back, say congratulations, enjoy it, and tell him not to serve fried chicken next year. Got it. All right. Or collard greens, or whatever the hell they serve.
He would go on to apologise publicly, stating that he didn't mean offence, even though his comments were extremely insensitive and played on racial stereotypes. Tiger would say that whilst Fuzzy's humour was out of bounds, he accepted his apology, as he didn't think he had any ill intent, and that he wanted to put the situation behind them. Having played golf with Fuzzy, I know he's a jokester, and I've concluded that no personal animosity towards me was intended. Animosity as a whole is relatively rare in golf, but there was plenty of it in what was known as the most disgraceful and disgusting day in the history of professional golf. The Ryder Cup is a tournament that is a great honour for players to play in, and it's expected that you play and act as a true professional and role model in the sport if you get picked. But the 1999 American team didn't embody that at all. With the likes of a young Tiger Woods and a veteran Phil Mickelson, they were losing badly. The Europeans were winning 10-6 and only needed 4 points on the final day to retain the cup. And in fairness, the Europeans were trash-talking before the final day, saying that they had the best players in the world and that the US players should be caddying for them. But the Americans rallied, maybe a little too hard. The American team riled up the American spectators, to the point where they were said to have acted like animals, and all the American players were brandished as madmen. Eventually, the usually tame and quiet golf spectators were louder than a football stadium and were hurling abuse at the European players, until one fan took it too far and spat on a European player's wife. It continued into the game-winning putt. An American player sank a putt that basically guaranteed them the win. It's usually customary to wait until the other player putts before celebrating, but he didn't. The European player had to wait a total of 8 minutes until the fans were quiet enough for him to finally finish off the game. The Americans went on to pull off a comeback and win, evidently getting into the heads of the European players. But loud and brash Americans aren't new to the sport of golf, and John Daly once again is featured in this video, but not for his diet, his drinking, his smoking habits, or his golf game, but for his scariest addiction of all. John had a terrible gambling problem. It began around the time that he turned pro, harmlessly betting with regulars at varying golf clubs on single holes, who thought, there's no way that this fat kid is good at golf, clearly not knowing who John was. But then it got worse. The more money John made, the more he'd gamble, and the more he'd gamble, the more he'd lose. On one occasion, he said that he lost $600,000 in an hour playing the 5,000 spin slots in Vegas before putting in another 600,000 and losing that as well. In the early days of his pro career, he'd won a tournament in South Africa for $16,000. That same evening, he went to the casino and lost it all, infamously trashing his hotel room as a result. And potentially the most light-hearted story to come from this was an altercation with his fourth wife. John had won over $50,000 at the casino that night, and he wrote in his book that his wife took issue with his gambling habits, as if she had some kind of claim to the fortune that he had made himself. He took that bag of $50,000 and he threw it in a river, telling his wife that if she wanted his money, she could go out there and fish it out herself. But someone who definitely doesn't need that money is Jon Rahm. After going to live golf, his finances are definitely not a worry, even if his performances of late have somewhat slipped. But this story is from 2021. Picture this: you're 3 days into the weekend, ready to go into Sunday, and you have a 6-shot lead at the Memorial Tournament against the best golfers in the world, and then you're told that you've had a positive COVID test, and that the whole weekend of playing goes to waste. He was forced to withdraw, missing out on the $3 million prize pool that he very well could have won. But someone who isn't a stranger to winning tournaments, unless it's a major, is Rory Mcilroy. But this story isn't about his golf game, it's about his love life. It was top of the papers when Rory broke up with his long-term girlfriend and then fiancée, Caroline Wozniacki. Both at the top of their respective sports, it was a sporting match made in heaven. Until it wasn't. They had sent out wedding invitations to their family and friends until Rory started to get cold feet. He reportedly split with the tennis player over a 3-minute phone call. But that's not where it ended. Caroline's replacement would be a staff member on the PGA Tour, Erica Stoll. This could have led people to believe that Rory had built a connection with who would end up being his future wife, before splitting with the tennis player. He'd marry Erica in 2017, and maybe you'd think they'd live happily ever after. Well, no. Only a few months into 2024, Rory announced that he would be divorcing Erica weeks before the US Open tournament. Then only 2 weeks later, he'd say that they had settled their differences and were staying together. Maybe he saw how much money he'd have to give her if he went through with it. Safe to say Rory's love life could be one of the most infamous love stories in golf history. And that's saying a lot, considering Tiger Woods also plays golf. And it wouldn't be a golf scandals video without the great Tiger Woods. You've likely heard about all these stories, so let's go over them really quickly. He cheated on his wife with allegedly over 120 women. His wife chased him out the house with a golf club after finding out, leading him to crash his car, with his wife then following him and smashing the windows of his car with that same club to help him get out. He crashed his car with sleeping pills and marijuana in his system. He was found idle in the middle of a road after falling asleep with sleeping pills and marijuana in his system once again. He lost over $1 billion in both endorsements and from the divorce with his wife, and cost brands that worked with him reportedly $12 billion. And that's about it. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe.